What's going on, guys? This is the Red Rogue, and I hope you're all doing well today. Despite having a limited amount of time to test it, we've finally gotten our first peek at the seasonal affix for Dragonflight Season 1, Thundering. This video will go over how it works so far and my initial thoughts of it, and this week I'll also have a couple videos showcasing the two dungeons that were up for testing if you're interested, the Ruby Life Pools and the Azure Vaults. Like all prior Mythic Plus seasonal affixes, you will not encounter Thundering until you're at least at Keystone level 10 or higher. This is a very preliminary glance into the iterative design of Thundering, so don't be surprised if this video doesn't match up to how it works once it's on retail servers. Don't worry, I'll be sure to do a tips and tricks video for that once Dragonflight is live. For now, we'll just see exactly what lurking horrors await us. Thundering causes lightning storms to trigger about every minute and a half or so while you're in a dungeon. This causes a bunch of blue swirly puddles to appear all around the players, and if you're hit by one of these, you will take some damage and be stunned. After the blue puddles are gone, all players are charged with electricity, causing these 5 orbs to appear around each of them. These orbs will wait briefly, but then fly outwards from each player, and all players hit by them are stunned again and take a good chunk of nature damage. So essentially, combine Volcanic, but add way more puddles of Volcanic, but they stun you, and the prideful affix beams from Shadowlands Season 1 together, but make those stun too, and make this literally 10 times more annoying since it happens during the entire run. You can likely guess this affix has already been deemed incredibly melee unfriendly due to positioning requirements, and the number of affixes that this seasonal will have devastating synergy with is equally scary. Quaking Thundering, Spiteful Thundering, Sanguine Thundering, Storming Thundering, and Volcanic Thundering all came to mind instantly and are frankly troll and horrible combinations that will likely be present throughout Season 1, as the only two affixes making a brief retirement from the rotation are Inspiring and Necrotic. You'll likely notice that this is the first seasonal affix since Battle for Azeroth that has no positive benefit for doing it correctly. Blizzard is apparently looking to reimagine what seasonal affixes mean for Mythic Plus in the long term of the game, and want to move away from the Kiss Curse mentality that was present throughout all of Shadowlands, where by using or doing the seasonal mechanic correctly, you are rewarded with a power gain of some type. They also want seasonal affixes to feel less complicated moving forward, as well as removing the borrowed powers received by seasonal dungeon effects, probably to make tuning a little easier in the future. Frankly though, even just comparing Thundering to some of the Shadowlands seasonal Mythic Plus affixes, in my limited time testing it, it felt far more invasive, since it happens on a consistent basis throughout the entirety of the dungeon, whereas affixes such as Prideful and Tormented were only dealt with a couple of times per run. More recent affixes, such as Shrouded and Encrypted from the last 2 seasons, are more prevalent in the dungeon, but arguably, at least for Shrouded, it is a fairly low impact affix, as all it does is swap out a few adds with a different add that you don't even have to kill if you don't want to, and they use the same moves repeatedly while also giving you a stat buff. While Zul'Gamix is quite annoying, she's still just one add in the dungeon and you could skip her in majority of cases. Thankfully, they have already stated this is an early look at the affix, but it needs to be made very clear as early as possible, since there's only like 6 or 7 weeks left till Dragonflight launches, that Thundering in its current iteration is a terrible design choice, and there is little you can do as a player to affect its outcome other than A, don't stand in lightning puddles, and B, hopefully dodge the dozens of ball lightning being spewed all around the room with their unlimited travel distance. Now, if they're dead set on avoiding giving buffs or benefits from dealing with seasonal affixes going forward in Dragonflight and beyond, then things need to change quite a lot. For one thing, this affix triggers really often in a dungeon. As I mentioned earlier, it was like every minute and a half or so. Now, if you remember other affixes in Mythic Plus, like regular ones, they often also are timer based, and several of them can overlap really often, one in particular being Quaking. Which Quaking, while also trying to spread out to avoid other people and avoid puddles on the ground, is insanely annoying. Then there's also the fact that the lightning puddles that spawn before the ball lightning come out is insane. There's just sometimes dozens and dozens of these things, it feels like you're just surrounded, and I'm terrified to imagine what these would feel like if there were other ground effect based affixes active like Storming or Volcanic. Worse yet, Dragonflight seems to have one very popular trend in the dungeons that I've tested. This seems to happen a lot with Blizzard when they design dungeons. They all kind of have one feature in common. Like in Shadowlands, almost every frickin' dungeon had enemies that would jump to the furthest away person all the time. So if you had ranged people standing at max range in your melee, have fun chasing things around like an idiot. Well, in Dragonflight, they decided that there would be a lot of enemies that drop ground effect style attacks all over the place. For instance, in the Ruby life pools, there are these ads that will just spin around in circles after you kill them, spewing fireballs that leave puddles on the ground for about 5 seconds before they finally actually die. And most of the time, there are multiple of them in the same pools, so this can get really staggering to deal with while also avoiding the thunder pools and the ball lightning of thundering. Let alone those spiteful ads that you know will be following you around on some weeks, or storming tornadoes throwing you in the air, letting you get hit by all that ball lightning and fire and death. Next, for annoyances with thundering, is those ball lightning things have a fixed direction that they shoot out from you regardless of which way you turn your character, which isn't necessarily a big deal, it's just the fact that it's in a shape of a pentagon. Now, if you remember the seasonal fix from Shadowlands Season 1, Prideful, it was an X-shaped pattern that shot out, and it was consistent across all the players in the group. X's are a lot easier to deal with because you're dealing with kind of just like an XY axis, but adding a fifth direction that a ball can come from is really, really annoying. So that needs to at least be dropped back down to like an X shape, because that's at least reasonably predictable to deal with. Frankly, I also think that you shouldn't even shoot out any orbs if you don't get hit by the lightning puddles in the first place. I don't really see how it makes sense that you'd become lightning charged or whatever if you didn't get hit by the lightning puddles in the first half of the affix. That alone would be a huge change to the way players deal with this affix, and it makes it feel like you actually have some control or skill required in the situation, rather than just being chain stunned over and over, or having to run away from trash that you're fighting because you have too many melee all piled up, waiting to douse each other in 1.21 gigawatts of death. To be honest with you folks, I don't really care if they remove the whole perk or benefit part of seasonal affixes, but if the idea was to make the affix less complicated or easier to tune the difficulty of dungeons around because it's not giving you a benefit anymore, then this is a very, very poor start. You also have to consider that in Dragonflight, there will be a rotation of Mythic Plus dungeons that changes each season, with only 4 of the new dungeons being in Season 1, plus old dungeons from Warlords of Draenor, Mists of Pandaria, and Legion. This means that we don't have the luxury of getting familiar or comfortable running the same dungeons for multiple patches in a row, to the point where we can kind of just remember how to do it more easily and more like muscle memory, which essentially means we're resetting the difficulty curve found in each season. Having an affix such as Thundering that just pummels you constantly throughout the dungeon is just invasive and frankly sounds like one of the least fun things they could have ever introduced to Mythic Plus. On top of all this, they also increased the difficulty scaling of dungeons past Keystone level 11, so pushing and progressing your Mythic Plus rating will be much harder than prior expansions. If this sounds like a lot of doom and gloom, then good, because this video is meant to point out the major flaws that are currently present in this affix and the design mentality that seems to be the new standard going forward, and it sometimes takes being very direct with criticism to get a point across. Most people on the beta likely only did this affix by itself with no other modifiers. This is possible because there is a keystone vendor and you can customize your key however you want, and a lot of people just wanted to test the new dungeon and the seasonal affix. However, I decided to do an actual affix key. Fortified, Raging, Quaking, Thundering. It was quite literally one of the most miserable experiences in Mythic Plus that I've ever had, to the point where we didn't even finish a plus 10 key. I think we had like 50 some odd deaths before we even got to the second boss. Yeah, it was pretty bad. Now, you could argue that's partially due to not knowing exactly how each ad works and tricks to mitigate things in the dungeon, but I've done Ruby life pools a few dozen times between leveling and just messing around with builds on beta, and this was just an insane affix combination. And that isn't even the worst possible one that I could think of out there. Regardless, I do know that Blizzard is already working on new iterations of the Thundering affix, and I hope we can find some common ground if these new seasonal affixes aren't going to give any benefits for players dealing with them. I hope this video helped give you folks some insight on the Thundering affix, so feel free to share your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. As always, my appreciation and gratitude to all of my viewers, and especially my patrons, who all help make these Shiba Shenanigans possible. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the Red Rogue, and I'll see you guys around.